Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Mistress Danielle Blunt, and I am so pleased to be here with my submissive and very special boy, my duckling. And I know that he is very nervous today to interview me, so I thought that we would start with a little bit of breathing. So, duckling, I want you to find a comfortable seat. And I want you to take a few deep breaths, just noticing where your breath is at today. And gently close your eyes and notice the chair beneath you. Taking this time to set an intention for our conversation today. Letting each breath be deeper than the last. Each breath stoking your submission, your desire to be good for me. And on your exhales, releasing any anxiety or tension that you have about today's conversation. Remembering if you get anxious or nervous at any time during our call, you can always return to your breath, just like I've taught you. I want you to take 3 more deep breaths, each deeper than the last. And after your third exhale, I want you to start by introducing yourself as my submissive and explaining what we're doing here today.
Thank you, Mommy. I am Mommy's duckling. I'm here to interview Mommy, which seems both scary and exciting. It's been over 2 years now that I've been serving Mommy, and looking back, it's been an amazing journey. Today, I think we wanted to talk especially about financial domination, something that honestly wasn't in my mind as something I wanted to explore when I reached out to you, Mommy. In the same way that I also wasn't looking for someone to call Mommy, either. But maybe it makes sense that these are two things that I definitely identify with you and now find they're becoming an important part of my identity.
You like what mommy likes.
I do like what Mommy likes.
Mommy is very persuasive. Um, yeah, so, well, why don't you start a little bit by telling us I like that I'm like, "You can interview me," and I immediately go into the interview mode, but about why you first approached me and why me, and then I'll start by letting you, I guess I'll, like, surrender some control and let you ask me some questions.
Oh, it was during the pandemic. I was definitely starting to examine my life and how I always wanted to explore kink. I've had submissive fantasies my entire life, but never really acted on them. So I found you via the Mommy's Basement shoot on kink.com. At a time when everything seemed very dark, I was desperate and wanted to reach out and finally begin. I wanted to say scratching this itch, but I think it was proving for sure more than that. I think one reason that we ended up going into this mommy little dynamic is that I felt like such a newcomer, a baby submissive. I don't know what led me to reach out to you, as someone a newbie might dare approach. But I'm so grateful, honestly, that you've taken me under your wing, and I've become your little duckling.
What else do you do with a duckling? Do I were you intimidated to reach out to me? I something that I've heard is that I'm intimidating, both, I think, just, like, as a dom and both being very experienced. I think somehow people see that as meaning that, like, I don't love playing with newbies or something like that, and I'm curious, um I'm curious if you'll be able to interview me, first of all, but also I'm curious, like, when you were reaching out to me, if you were a little bit intimidated and what got you over that.
I definitely was intimidated. In my life, I've visited many dominatrix websites and fantasized about what could be, but it always seemed to be just fantasy. Not for me. And not for me because it seemed outside of what was available to me. Honestly, it was OnlyFans that made me feel safe enough to approach you since I could do it initially anonymously. It did take me a few days before I followed your prompt to introduce myself and tell you a bit more about myself. That was after I had a chance to just get a better sense of your content and see you actually record voice notes for me, which was amazing and really opened my eyes. I saw how good that made me feel to hear from you, while still feeling at the time somewhat safe. Of course, looking back, less than a month later I was buying you a new MacBook, so things moved pretty quickly from there, I would say.
Yeah, not bad, not bad. Um, okay, and so we wanted to chat today a little bit about our dynamic. I was going to give you carte blanche to ask me questions, but I think something that we were both kind of interested in having a conversation about, um, which is actually something I was just chatting about with, I just interviewed Miss Amina and we were chatting about this as well, of people who are very interested in DS starting to realize that they might be interested in financial domination instead of the other way around. And so, as you said in the beginning, you weren't initially interested in financial domination, but it is something that we play quite a bit with in our dynamic. And so, I thought it would be fun to give you the opportunity to ask me whatever questions you want. I have done zero prep work because I don't like to work. And so, we'll see what comes out of my mouth.
Thank you, Mommy. I do appreciate this opportunity to ask you some questions, and I was going to joke about interrogating you, but I can't even bring myself to do that. So I guess one thing I was curious about. You've spoken about how you've always been interested in money and the importance of it, and the role it's played. I was wondering if something in your upbringing primed you to focus on financial domination, or was it something about the world around us that caused you to grow in that direction and incorporate it into your style of dominance?
Yeah. You know, I also this week interviewed my mom about having a sex worker daughter, and part of what we talked about was how some of my dad's neuroses around money really rubbed off on me. But I think it's definitely like a combination of the two. I was always very interested in money. My mom actually told a story about how that I didn't really remember about when I started, my first job was babysitting, and I like was asking for a significantly higher rate than like anyone in the area. And I'm like, well, I know what I'm worth. So like, why wouldn't I charge what I'm worth at like 13? So somehow I learned my worth pretty early on and like knew that I had a lot to offer and that there would be people who were willing to pay that. But I also was like very into the cash. Like some of my earlier memories are like ironing money that I had earned and exchanging it with my parents for larger and larger bills until like I had $100 bill and I like hid it. It was like my prized possession. And I was just obsessed with it. I think I knew from a very early age. Actually, I feel like when I released the interview with my mom, like a lot of this will come up again, but I was really interested in sex from an early age because it was the one thing that people wouldn't answer when I had questions about it. And so I was like, oh, like this must be a very powerful thing, as well as having a parent who was very anxious about money. We were definitely like an upper middle class family, but my parents came from more working class backgrounds. And so I think some of that anxiety around money was still present, regardless of being in a different financial situation when I was growing up. Um, and so I think it just like kind of like coded into my body both the like interest in sex and sexuality as an avenue for exploring power, as well as my interest in money. And I like, since I was like 12 or 13, when people asked what I wanted to do, I would say, I'm going to marry rich and divorce, marry rich and divorce. And after my third husband, I should be all set. And like, there was just like something that I knew that like the money needed to be my own. Like I didn't want to just marry rich. I wanted to marry rich and divorce and like I wanted to be a wealthy divorcee, not a housewife. And like I think that's how I understood the power dynamic. So I think there's something like very core there for me of both like financial security making me feel comfortable and safe. And I think you like have to feel safe in order to be like vulnerable. And yeah, just like really understanding like money as a conduit for power.
Yeah, that makes sense. What you said about money being something people don't want to talk about, along with sex. I definitely really feel that now. Both have a certain kind of cachet and power that honestly, it's just hot. In your mind, is there something kind of shared in that kind of taboo nature between the two, that there is something inherently powerful in both money and sex?
Yeah, I think that might have to do a little bit with my interest in it, but I think it also like comes from like how I got the name Blunt. I was told like I had the subtlety of a metaphoric sledgehammer. I like had this like obsessive uh desire of like to like do not do what was right and wrong, but like when people didn't do what I felt was the morally right thing, I got like very upset when I was younger, and like I would point it out to a way that I like really had to learn to rein myself back in. You know, I think like my bluntness was a form of like early sadism, but I think also it like was like this exigent sadism of like the desire for people to like push themselves and like do better and be better and like really like go to that edge and the limit. And like I always loved like playing at that edge. And I definitely think like both the bluntness that was sort of like intrinsic to who I was. I think it's like less about the fact that it was taboo and that people weren't talking about it and I didn't understand why. And so it has always come really, really naturally to me to have like very blunt conversations about both sex and money. I think it's really important. I think you know, like I think it's really important that like we talk like we share information about like how we're doing, how we're like hustling and like sharing that information in like sex worker spaces so that like sharing your salary in tech, you know, I think it's really important that these conversations are able to be had um so that people know how to advocate for themselves, you know, like I think it's a very fucked up thing that like we're not taught comprehensive sex education, that we're not taught how to balance a fucking textbook in school. These seems like really, really important things that really um, don't benefit us to not learn about.
Yeah, that makes sense. As someone on the receiving end of your bluntness, it's definitely helped me appreciate the importance and value of being able to talk about things that previously I would feel very self-conscious about. Money and sex.
Do you want to say more about that?
I mean, just that one reason why I haven't further explored kink earlier in my life is this sense that it wasn't for me or that I wasn't sexy enough. I was someone who grew up interested in and afraid of girls, afraid to make the first move and afraid of rejection. It's something that really got into my head, making this kind of shame and fear around sex even more potent and powerful, hanging over my head. So honestly, that's somewhere I've really appreciated your help, helping me confront it a bit more. On the money side, I definitely feel very grateful for the combination of luck and privilege that has allowed me to do pretty well financially, enough to offer you some of what you naturally deserve. But even then it's something. There's some degree to which my financial submission to you is one way I am acknowledging this privilege that I don't feel like I particularly deserve. I mean, in my industry, people are paid more than we probably should be. It seems right to give back, and I haven't found anyone more worthy of giving that money to than you.
And I think it makes the power exchange more tangible is something that we've been exploring with, especially with our relationship taking place, you know, over like mediated technologies and virtual spaces. I think, you know, in some of our like more findom scenes, you've really felt my power over you and that feeling of loss of control and like not feeling like you can say no to me and like that kind of like juicy state of like flux, of like being in that space of subspace. And I think FinDom has sort of facilitated a lot of those experiences for us.
Definitely. In my experience with porn before, I've always been fascinated by the idea of subspace. It's something I always wanted to experience for myself. When I first reached out to you, it was under the assumption that subspace wasn't something I could experience online. I thought maybe you could mentor me, help me find that experience more locally. But I've come to appreciate the power of money because there is technology around it to be able to transmit it, to send it to you digitally. It creates the possibility of you being able to do something to me that does hurt. It does feel like a very real and tangible form of submitting, even though there's no physical contact. Through the power of money, something of me is being liquidated, reduced into this kind of digital liquid form that is being.
Hot. Mommy does want you
Yeah.
to suffer just a little bit.
Thank you, Mommy.
So welcome. Okay, next question.
Okay. So clearly the seeds of FinDom have been in you all along, but I was wondering when you began incorporating it into your work as a dominatrix? Was it a revelation, something you just realized you could add into your work, or did it evolve more organically over your career?
Yeah, I think I like came out of like I came into BDSM through like an older guard leather house where I feel like there's sex work happening. I was doing sex work. I feel like my first introduction, which is not FinDom, but was like working a production job and like then doing 4 hours of sex work and making just as much as I made in a month of doing like pretty low wage work. And I'm like, okay, well, like this feels amazing. But I think I like came out of a leather space where like, like these like fet life submissives who are like somehow a financial exchange reduces the power dynamic instead of increases and enhances it and offers so many more different avenues for play. And I think because I came out of this old guard space, it wasn't like something that I was like super conscious of, but I don't think I was thinking about financial domination. I think that came a little bit later and I think it came more in my personal relationships, to be perfectly honest, where, I think because of like those early childhood experiences, I was always looking for a certain level of financial security from a partner as well. And I think, instead of divorcing, I just took the money. Like that's what felt good for me. And I think the more I was able to kind of like tie financial domination as an extension of femdom, that really solidifies the power dynamic. And I've written about this on a blog post that I'm about to publish, but I truly believe that the exchange of money in a DS dynamic is the only way you can materially change the power someone holds in a situation after you end the scene. And I am a lifestyle dom. I like am a very kinky person, and like my primary interest is power exchange and always has been throughout my entire career. And so I think when I began to be a little bit more interested in money as a conduit for power, I really like leaned in pretty deeply into it, because it is so erotically charged for me, and because like the thing that is so erotically charged also means that my power is increasing, and I just don't understand I understand why people might not want to play with it, but I don't understand like the rhetoric of somehow in exchange for money reduces the DS dynamic or like the power exchange or like the realness of the relationship.
For you, at the risk of getting you in trouble, would you say that for you personally, or maybe even for DS more broadly, people who are not exchanging money, are they leaving something on the table, so to speak?
I don't like shitting on other people's practices. I have seen some like pretty bad takes about sex work and like the exchange of money and like what that means for the relationship that I don't really like. But like, no, like I don't think you need to play with financial domination. But I do think if you just like I don't think you need to play with feet, you know what I mean? Like I think feet for me, my feet like induce like a very deep subspace for many people. But if someone's not into that, like they people should do whatever the fuck they want. I think for me, um, especially playing with people who have more power than I do, playing with money is just about non-negotiable if you want to play with me. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think because I am interested in a genuine power exchange, and if you are not interested in surrendering your power, we're not going to vibe. We're not going to get along. But that's not to say that all of my dynamics have an element of financial domination. I think all of my dynamics have elements of generosity. I think I am very persuasive. I think I have thought about these things a lot. I think about power. I think about BDSM. I think about DS like nonstop for 15 years. And like before that, when I was like doing my babysitting, hustling, and like thinking about being a wealthy divorcee, it's what I think about, and it's what I desire. And what I desire is someone surrendering their power to me. I'm interested in executing my elegant control over someone. And for me, a way that I have found to be very effective and to really just facilitate that surrender is through financial domination. I think it's definitely something I've been into more explicitly for, I don't know, like the second half of me being a Dom. Um, and I think it's still like, I feel like I want to differentiate between I think that the fetish of financial domination is very sexy, but I've never been one who's like particularly drawn to one-off experiences. And I feel like the fetishist who's into findom, who wants like a rough draining, they like kind of parachute in and then they leave. And I think what I'm talking about here is financial domination as an extension of femdom and just like one of the tools, right? Like your money is just one of the tools that I have in my toolbox is just one of the tools that I have in like my play bag of things that I can use to facilitate like your surrender and increasing devotion and like bring you into that subspace. And it is something that I want to play with.
Yeah, that makes sense. As someone who didn't come into this wanting to play with Findom, I'm honestly grateful that you did introduce it to me. I was actually wondering, did you give this fetish to me intentionally, or as you said, you're very persuasive? Just being around you, there's an aura of money is power. Power is what I want to surrender. It all makes sense.
Yeah. I think you want what mommy wants. But I think that I do like giving people fetishes, I'm not gonna lie. I love when people tell me that they're not interested in feet and then they see my feet and are like a little fucking bitch for my feet and would do anything to worship them properly, you know? And I think the same is true for financial domination. Financial domination is less just interest and more like I think that I'm able to talk about power in such a way where people who weren't necessarily interested in financial domination to begin with can understand it as an extension of a power exchange rather than just the fetish of being used and disposed of. And I think that's where so many people miss the opportunity to play with findom and their dynamics is because of what, you know, I think what is presented of financial domination online is largely that like you're a loser, you don't deserve your money, and like it looks better in my little princess hands, which is like no, this is no shade, it's just not my style. I think it's a very successful archetype, then I think it really works for some people. But I think that it is harder from that archetype to tap into the type of power exchange that I'm interested in. And I think because I am interested in power and power first, that um, I have some unpacking to do with the people that I play with about sort of stigma around findom and stigma around paying for an experience and stigma around like their feelings after sending so much. Like, was I just used? Is that okay to feel used? Like, is it okay to feel like mommy's toy? Is it okay to bring pleasure to a woman like this? Rather than that being the erotic component. The people that I tend to play with, I love a rough drain. Like I feel like we had a little bit of a rough drain the other day. And like it was like very hot. But for me, it's always the most fun when it's part of an ongoing dynamic because so much of my DS is relational and built on building. Like I am a dom. The relationships that I have are with me as a dom and my submissives. You know what I mean? It's like I have friends, but like this is how I do like intimate, sexual, and romantic partnerships in general. And um, like I don't have an alpha. I don't really believe in alphas. Um, uh, so it's just like a slightly different approach. I think right there's the approach where you're coming to it from findom and like the facade of like I am not doing labor, I am just hot and you are going to send me your money when like you're actually um doing like five jobs of like editing video content, always being online, like draining submissive. You're being, paid for your labor and maybe then some. But I think I am more interested in having like more complicated conversations around power and power exchange and like building into that intentionality and like co-creating a relationship with someone that is based on power exchange where money is not necessarily off of the table. Like it doesn't, something that doesn't make sense to me is, if someone, and this again, to each their own, I don't want to get in trouble over this, but like if someone has a submissive who is a multimillionaire and they are not, like, how would you not want to make sure you're increasing your dom's power in the world, that you're taking things off of her plate that she has to worry about, that you're paying her fucking rent, that like you are doing everything you can to submit and surrender so that she has less to think about. You know what I mean? Like I think to me then that also becomes like a form of control when that's not being shared or it's like being dangled, the carrot dangling I think is a big thing. And I think like this conversation like moves between femdom, BDSM, the like various different professional and personal dynamics that someone can have, and of course it's like different for everyone. But I think for me what I'm interested in is that surrendering of control and that co-creation of a dynamic where um right, it's mutually beneficial and someone like really understands their place in my life and what their job is to support my success, my comfort, my pleasure at all times, and what that really means to prioritize my pleasure at all times, not just when you're jerking off.
Yeah, definitely. One reason I wasn't interested in findom going in was that portrayal of the pay pig. There were some big gifts that I gave you in the beginning, but over time, it developed into being turned on by this kind of perpetual drip, where you're just extracting and taking the money that you want and need from me. Accepting that has been honestly super hot.
Why should I spend my money when I can spend yours? I think it's a very hot thing for me too, like having submissive credit cards, having your credit card and being able to tap on that and pull on it and like setting it up so it gives you notifications so that it's this perpetual pull towards me, this perpetual like pushing and this perpetual motion that facilitates your submission and your surrender rather than like sure, like I like and like I think like as we move into a deeper dynamic, the way some of that looks might change. Like I have submissives whose paychecks are deposited automatically into my account and I give them
Hot.
an allowance, right? Hot. And so I think it can look very different. But I think it's interesting too because all of my all of the fin subs who approach me and all of the people who want are interested in playing with money with me in different ways and like understand it to be part of a power exchange, um, don't typically see other findoms, and that's not what they were seeking out or interested in. Or if it was, they're like, oh, I'm interested in money. They already like understand the money power connection and are interested in playing with that rather than it exclusively being a form of like degradation and humiliation.
I've definitely learned to love the fact that you can pull the cash now from me via the card. Before that, there was some comfort on my side being in the driver's seat and being the one to initiate the sending. Getting someone to send to you, does it feel like seduction? Does it feel like working to convince them to give you what is yours? I'm curious, what is more satisfying to you, convincing someone to drain themselves for you, or being able to pull from them at any time?
Yeah. I think everything I do is an act of seduction, first of all, and pulls you deeper into my web. But I do think, someone was asking me, someone I was playing with was like, well, wouldn't it be boring for you if I don't struggle? And I'm like, no. I don't want to work for it, like I want to take it. Like I think it can be hot, so, like watching someone get weaker and weaker for me. And like it's like kind of similar to like how what you're talking about. Like at first, like you really wanted to stay in control. You wanted to like you didn't want me to like have access to the account or like see what's in it. And like I think it takes time and trust to like build up to that level where I can just tell you to transfer the whole amount, as much as I want. Did you just give me a thumbs up?
I think it was you, I'm not sure.
I didn't, but I appreciate the positive affirmation. Um, I like, it's like very different styles. I think there is something that inspires me a lot is cults. And I try and like have, some of these conversations with people both in and out of subspace. So like I can still exert my control while I'm talking about the processes by which I'm doing it with, which I think is really hot. Like I'm going to tell you exactly what I'm going to do to you, and it's still going to fucking work, you know? Like I think that that's really hot and really fun. And so like I do appreciate some of the seduction and like watching people get like trapped and stuck in my web. But I also like my style of dominance. I really love when people are ready to fucking submit. Like I'm not a brat tamer, that is like no, like that is other people's area of expertise. Other people actually enjoy that. Like I like compliance. I like when people do what I say because I am saying it and they see my word as gospel, like I think that has to be earned, like I don't want blind compliance. I like when people come to me and know why they want to serve me, not that they just want to serve a dominant archetype, but they know why they want to serve me and they're ready to take that step. And I think that's why I get like we started off talking about me being intimidating, but I think it is why like people will follow me. I tend to find that people will follow me for a while, watch a lot of my interviews, read like all of the exhaustive content on my sites and chat with me for a while and then surrender because what I am interested in is not being a fetish dispensary. I am only interested in what your fetishes are because it's a tool of control, and I think I'm really only interested in playing with people who want to experience that level of power exchange and DS. And of course, that is not the entirety of what I do and who I play with, but those really are the dynamics that I enjoy the most and always have.
That makes sense. For me, the funny thing is that I went into this focusing more on fetishes and specific kinks and toys and whatnot, but I very quickly learned that I love your psychological domination. It's your ability to use those fetishes simply as ways to get past my defenses, to reach the right mind behind. I'm wondering, is there a kind of synergy there between fin-dom and psychological domination, given the fluidity of money? Since it can power all the things we buy and do?
Yeah, I think that I do think it's interesting that you came to me with like you have very elaborate fantasies, which are very fun. And I actually like something that I love both in the realm of like guiding us through a fantasy together virtually. People who come to me like with very specific interests, it's like very fun to play with. Like I think it's a very beautiful way of getting to know someone. And like some of my favorite people that I have played with are also like very into like specific scenes and like bringing all the props and like just like have been fantasizing about this for years and want to do it. And I have a lot of fun with that, especially when it comes from their desires, because those are not what my fantasies are about. Um, but it gives me insight into their psyche. And I think because so many people's sexuality forms around like first like around like formative sexual experiences from when they were younger, as well as the porn that they're seeing, I think that the like emotional and psychological side can be a little bit lacking in people's imagination as to what is possible. And so I feel like something that has been so fun with me on my fan sites is that like people will watch and people will voyeur and like when they're ready to see me, they'll dip a toe in and like send me a message and then like maybe retreat a little bit and till they're ready to take that further step and build that relationship with me and like see what we can do together. And I think that that's something that I really really appreciate. And I think the more my style of domination has evolved, the more psychological it has been. I have always been the dom who's been like, I don't need any toys to facilitate your surrender. Like all I need is like my body, my intellect, my like style of seduction and my voice. And it has always been very fun for me to use very minimal toys. Um, and my style, I like am a heavy sadist. I feel like I do both. Like I'm a heavy sadist, but I'm also like a heavy emotional sadist, which I feel like is something that is overlooked when we talk about sadism. Like I want to see you suffer. I want to see you struggle. I want to see that it is hard for you and you are still doing it for me. You are still struggling because you want to bring me pleasure. And I think that that struggle will be better for you. Like I think most people that I play with feel better about many different aspects of their life. There's like a transformational quality that I like to bring to my style of domination and that I think is possible. And so I think both my interest in psychological domination and my interest in money and power exchange feel really interconnected to me because right, like I'm doing a heavy corporal scene on you and you're over my lap and I'm pulling your hair and I'm giving you a very heavy spanking. That is hot, undeniably. First of all, let's just pause to like think about that. And you might feel my power over you physically in that moment. But for me, it is very uninteresting to me if I'm not also tapped into the psychological of why that makes you feel powerless. Are you doing it for mommy? Like, what are you suffering for? And like, what is it doing to transform how you are in this relationship? Um, and I think, right, like when I am taking money from you, psychologically, it's already tapped in, there's nothing necessarily physical about it besides what your emotions can do to your brain. And I think that it's something like, and I feel like in the spanking scene that I'm describing, I feel like there's always something psychological and emotional going on for both people. It's just a matter of sharing that and bringing it together to like yoke the psychological to the physical impact of that scene. And I think that there is something that is kind of I'm working through this. through this theory with you while I'm talking about it, but something about financial domination where you when you stand until it hurts, you are engaging with the psychological part of you, the emotional part of you, until you feel it in an embodied sense. And I think that that pathway is very, very interesting to me of going in through the brain until you feel it through the body, rather going through the body until you feel it in the brain. I think it's like a twofold path that are both very effective. But I think I describe my style of domination as low spoons, coming from like disability theory of spoon theory, which anyone can Google. But I want to do as little as possible to facilitate your surrender. You know, like I don't want to work. I don't want to break you down. Like I will, and it will be fun and it will be hot. But like someone was asking like, well, like wouldn't it be boring for you if I just like presented it to you? And I'm like, no, like if you are ready for that level of surrender, there is nothing boring about that because your surrender is not the final goal, you know? It is your growth and your continual submission that you choose over and over again every day. And the deeper and deeper you go.
Yeah, I think that transformation you talked about is one of the most eye-opening things for me in my experience with you. Initially, I thought FinDom was about being dehumanized into a wallet or something, whereas now I feel like, wait, I want to give mommy more money. I need to improve. I need to become better. For me, it's changing the framing from being an object to being an asset. That's very hot.
Yeah, I love you as my little asset. And I think like I am proud of like my submissive success and like I had a submissive like come out of retirement to like better serve me and I've had people really advocate for raises and like figuring out where their position is in their org and like figuring out how to structure their life in a way that both brings them more joy and brings me more resource and pleasure.
To a very real extent, pushing myself to be more valuable to you is making me appreciate my own value in ways that I didn't realize before. Thank you, Mommy.
You're so welcome. I love watching my little asset grow for me. We have like 4 more minutes, so I'll let you ask me one more question. Is there any burning questions you want to make sure?
I guess, maybe it's not so much a question. I just wanted to say that I've been really vibing on this idea of being melted and liquidated for Mommy. My free will and my independence being milked from me, as pre-cum or cum, transformed into money for Mommy, spent on your pleasure. I've been very into this idea of fluids being tapped from me and extracted. What relationship do you see between orgasm control and FinDom? Or is it more idiosyncratic? How each relationship puts together these kinks into dynamics?
Can you say the last part of the question again?
Do you see a synergy or a particular relationship between orgasm control and FinDom? Or is it more of a bespoke thing for each individual submissive? How these things tie together?
I think everything I do is bespoke to each submissive because their own like formative experiences, their desires are so unique and so different. And that's part of what I love about getting to be in relationship with so many different people is that I like learn about them. I like learn about people's experiences and desires that are different than mine and like where they intersect. Um, and like right when you were describing about like being like liquefied and like milked for mommy, I'm thinking like, yes, like mommy is a witch. Mommy is an alchemist. Mommy is literally turning your sexual energy into gold. Like that is like one of the definitions of alchemy of like turning something that is not gold into gold. And so I think like when we think of it that way, that like alchemy that you are describing is both like very much a like esoteric thought as well as like very tangible way that like I am spinning your desire around my fucking finger and turning it into gold. And like I come from a background in yoga where practices of brahmacharya where we are harnessing the energy from the orgasm and that sexual life force as a way to explore aspects of ourselves and like build virility and like blah 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 and all these different things. But I think of it as a form of control, you know. I think of orgasm control as just that, as a form. of control. And what I'm interested in, like going back to the very beginning of the conversation, is power dynamics and control. And so if you are someone who is attached to their desire and their orgasm, controlling that just facilitates my power. And so touching, like having to beg for permission to touch yourself, having to beg for permission to come, both makes you express what your desire is, as well as give me that point, that like locus of control where you're just constantly feeding me data. And so I think of myself as both a data analyst and an alchemist, where like I am turning the data that you are giving me about your sexuality into something that gives me more control. And I'm just like running numbers in my head at all time, like, oh, like this is what they said, like this is what I'm gonna do with it. And I like love that idea of like I'm not only like harnessing the energy of your orgasm, but I'm harnessing that energy of your vulnerability and using it in a way where it is benefiting our relationship and where the goal of the relationship is for you to surrender further. And I think that's like a common, that's like the biggest commonality among my like DS relationships that I have, is that the goal is to go further and the goal is to go deeper and the goal is to surrender more and sacrifice more, all in the name of mommy's pleasure, all in the name of mistress's pleasure. And I think that those are the submissives that I really connect with the most, who want to prioritize my pleasure, my ease, my comfort in all ways, not just when they're jerking off and aroused.
I love that, mommy. And you're right, it does feel like magic and alchemy. I love the idea of you optimizing my data into control over me.
You would like
Thank you,
that.
mommy.
You're so welcome. Well, it was such a pleasure to chat with you. Why don't you turn the recording off for now? And you can, do you know how to do it? Do you want me to explain?